first time that I was in charge of designing an entire sales training program. I was at a startup, and we were looking at building essentially a way to deliver income planning directly to the consumer. And so they hired me, and we brought in 6 financial advisors, and I built this training program, and we would, of course, be doing role-playing and all kinds of different sales practices and things like that. And the downside was that they had hired us a little bit early in the process, and so they ran into some regulatory snags, and it kind of slowed us down, so we weren't actually able to talk to clients. So we had about 3 or 4 months where we were just kind of spinning our wheels, and I was still running the weekly sales trainings, and that's what I was hired to do. Eventually, they took me off and had me do some other stuff because I think the salespeople started complaining about how much practice I made them do. One day we were up in the conference room, and everybody was kind of unmotivated. Everyone was getting frustrated because they thought they were going to be talking to live clients, and we'd been kind of spinning our wheels now for a month or two. And one of the team, as I'm trying to rally everybody, and I'm like, who wants to start out with role plays today? And nobody wanted to. And one of the team members kind of drops his notebook on the table, and he says, you know what, guys? He's really annoying, but he's right. This does make us better. So who's going to start? That story came to mind. We are talking about episode 23 of the Valuability Podcast, asking good questions and active listening. And of course, asking good questions and active listening was a huge part of that training program that I built. So it was just a humorous story that came to mind as we were preparing for this episode. The Valuability Podcast is for financial advisors, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor, product wholesaler, and annoying master of training for financial services organizations for over 20 years. I'm joined each week by my co-host, friend, and longtime mentor, Philip Simonson. Philip has been in financial services for over 40 years as a financial advisor, field leader, sales trainer, and senior manager in areas such as advisor development and field operations. You know, Philip, I had been thinking the other day about the last, really all of this year, right? Ever since the beginning of the year, we've been dealing as a world community with a heightened level of stress. And I went out to my friend's farm a week or so ago, and it ended up being way more stressful than it was relaxing. And as I was coming home from that, I just started thinking about some of the stress that I had been carrying, and wanted to express that, you know, even though you may not feel it on a day-to-day basis, it's important to let yourself let go of that stress. Find some way that you can let go of that stress, because it built up and built up and built up in me. And when I went out to visit my friend, I really almost had a panic attack, and I realized that I just hadn't let myself relax. And so when I came back from that, I really did unwind. I just took a day and I turned off my phone and I didn't read news and I just like let it unwind. And I thought it was an important thing. When I maybe have one of the least stressful lifestyles on earth right now. And I'm still finding stress in my life that I didn't know about. So I just thought it was an important thing to mention and say, you know what? People who have kids, who have family, my mom passed away years ago. I think about if she were alive, how stressed I would be about her. So just wanted to mention that and say, be sure to give yourself a break, figure out a way to unwind a little bit because it's there whether you realize it or not.
That's right, Dan. And I think, there's good stress and there's bad stress. And good stress is, northern Minnesota, as many of our listeners know, it's where I live. Well, there are only 2 weeks in the summer that you really can count on for good weather, and that's the last week of July, first week of August. Well, if you're getting ready to go on your holiday, then it's amazing that 1 week before the holiday, that's good stress. You are alert, you're focused. It's how much you can get done. Just continuously surprises me. That's good stress. Now, my British friends used to, educate me. Look, you Yanks, you haven't quite figured it out yet. You just take 1 week off for your holiday. And I like holiday better than vacation as well. And they said, you need a fortnight or 2 weeks off. And so why's that? Well, the first week you just unwind. The second week you relax. And that makes so much sense. And the key thing that you said, Dan, that just for our listeners before we go into our main topic is self-awareness, listening to that inner voice that is being played 6 inches between the ears. Take some time. Listen to it, figure out, all right, if you've got this, the bad stress is stress that goes on for a long period of time. And this, this COVID thing certainly can, create an environment where that is occurring for many people. You've got to have some type of outside release or activity that you could do, like yoga, in a sense, working out. Listening, just sit back, listening to music, but you somehow treat yourself, listen to that voice, and get yourself to unwind, because bad stress is going to play havoc on your health over the long period of time. So, always a good reminder, Dan.
Absolutely. No, it really crept up on me, so it's one of the reasons why I thought it was important to mention and remind people of that I was kind of, I'll admit it, looking down my nose a little bit at people. First of all, I'm a huge introvert, so I definitely am looking down my nose at all the extroverts that are freaking out about the fact that they can't be around people. I'm like, now you know how I feel all the time. But on the stress side, I was also like, this is easy, everything's fine, and it really jumped up at me. And good. So even if you feel like you're dealing with it well, like I was, just wanted to put that reminder out there. So you can find the Valuability Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you find your podcasts, we should be there. We also have a YouTube channel. Search Value-Ability on YouTube to find us there. We are also on our website, of course, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and our episode player is there. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. Right now, sharing with other people is the best thing that you can do for us. If you're a regular listener, let other people know about the podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, reach out to us on our email, info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. To follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, check out value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab, and our links for all of our social media are there. So our main topic for today, asking good questions and active listening. We do have a document this week that you can follow along with, so we will post that at value-ability.com. Click on the content tab and scroll down to episode 23, and the document is called Asking Questions and Active Listening. Click on the link. It's a 3-page document, and it is a nice piece to follow along with the content that we have here. So in terms of asking questions, when you're in traditionally the data gathering stage of the sales process or client acquisition process. So although certainly during the prospecting phase, you may have question asking occurring as well, but the core of where a lot of the questions that you're going to ask your client, prospective client, new client, is during the data gathering stage. And the first breakdown, of course, is the concept of open-ended versus closed-ended questions. And the easy way to delineate those two is a closed-ended question is one that you can answer with a simple yes or no. And the open-ended questions require a longer response.
Yeah, they solicit feelings or responses that are much longer than the yes or no. Yes.
Right. Yep. Or just a single answer, right? How old are you
That's a closed.
It's a closed-ended question, right? It's asking for a specific fact, right? That's another part of closed-ended questions. They're used to confirm facts or to assist you in establishing if your conversation is on the right track, right? Hey, are these, are we covering the things that you want to cover today? Confirming that the conversation is headed in the right direction. The other big distinction, open-ended versus closed-ended, is typically, although I just used one that uses one of these words, typically open-ended questions start with the question words that we all learn in elementary school are the parts of a newspaper article, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Typically, those are open-ended questions. Of course, I just gave you an example of a closed-ended one that started with how, but typically open-ended questions are those that, as Philip mentioned, are eliciting more information and trying to set up that more conversational feel of the conversation. If you use a ton of closed-ended questions, it ends up feeling a lot like an interrogation, right? And also impersonal, right? Like, I've got an agenda and I'm trying to figure out something. I want to know something, becomes adversarial feeling, feels like an interrogation, a questioning, whereas open-ended questions tend to allow the client to, kind of find their own course and ultimately give you really what you're looking for, which is finding out what is important to them, right? In the process of data gathering, your big key is trying to figure out, if you're truly being consultative, your role is to figure out what's important to them, and then figure out it's the great phrase that you use at the beginning of your initial interview, figure out whether it makes sense for us to work together.
Yeah, there's, if you get, with that open-ended questions, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Dan. The initial interview, I asked 2 questions at the very beginning. And here's just some tips. First tip is radical concept. If you ask the client what it is they want out of the meeting, or you're going to have a better chance of achieving what it is than if you haven't asked. So right out of the gate, I'll just ask, what one or two outcomes do you want from this meeting here today? So at the end of this meeting, like LensCrafter, in and out in about an hour here, will be 45 minutes to an hour. You can say this has been time well spent. Now that's touching the heart first before the brain. Second thing I'll also ask them, look, there'll also be two premises we'll get accomplished here today. The first one is whether I'll determine within this 45 minutes to an hour whether or not I can help you out. More importantly, you'll determine whether or not there's enough perceived value for us to enter into a long-term relationship by the end of this meeting. Does that sound like two premises that make good sense and I'm comfortable achieving here today? That's a yes or no then. So I go into it with the closed. Then the first one with the what makes them give me the solicit with their outcomes, a little more open-ended. And what questions too? What questions, we've mentioned this before, they make a person go internal. So I like to use the what questions when I get into the developing their goals. And that's when I'm using them to develop their emotionally compelling goals. Because two things there. One, they're going to now, if I help them create emotionally compelling goals, they're going to own them. People buy on emotion, not on logic. That's the first thing. Secondly is I'm using the what questions there, so that gives them their internal, it makes them go internal, and then they're going to have a better chance of gaining their aha moment or insight on their own. And if you're able to give them that opportunity, now they own it. And one of the things when I'm working with potential prospects and clients, my ideal client criteria, one is, of course, I got to like them. Two, they got to come prepared to meetings, and they got to own their goals. I can't push a rope. I can pull a rope, but it's easier to pull the rope if, in this case, if they take ownership of their own goals. So there's just a couple things there, Dan, and I can expound on more with that emotionally compelling question. But those are the two I kick off with right away, just as you said.
Even when you stick with primarily open-ended questions, I find, especially as you're really building your mastery, so to link back to one of our previous episodes, when you're in that middle mastery phase, so you're not in level 1, level 2, you're figuring out what you don't know, but you've gotten past that, and you're really starting to build into those higher levels of mastery. One of the traps that people tend to fall into is that thinking more about the question than actually paying attention to what the person is saying. And that's where the concept of question extensions and active listening really comes in handy. Another thing you do in your initial interview is you let people know that you're going to be taking notes up front, and then you do take notes, right? And the really important thing about taking notes is, yes, you are going to use them later on when you're developing your plan to come back and reference, but you can also use them then to not have to constantly be searching for a new question. So as an example, you ask an open-ended question, the person responds, and they're talking about specific goal or thing like that, and you also do a really great job of this, is at the end of that, you traditionally will say, is there anything else I need to know about that? Or tell me more about that.
Tell me more is always a great question. Or just, and that gets them, that keeps them going. I know you're going to get to this, and after I ask that question, is there anything else I need to know about this particular goal? After, and then I hear their response. Anytime you add another tip to our listeners, anytime you ask a question, You got to let the people know you've heard them. And, and that could just be excellent, brilliant, simple as that. But at least they acknowledge that you've heard their response. Another way you
Right.
can do that is use your, and I'll let you expound on this, Dan, but the reflective closes. So, again, going back, what one or, is there anything else I need to know about this particular goal? Well, then after I've heard that, I'll use a reflective question to let them know I've heard them. And it could be, I'll just say it. It's just, hey, here's now, let me just paraphrase, or here's what I've heard you say. And then I'll rephrase, the goal. For instance, you said you wanted to retire at age 62. You wanted to have 50,000 in today's income. During the retirement, you're going to be playing golf. You're going to be every 3 years. You want to take a major, international trip. It's going to cost anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000, and you want to be spending time with your grandchildren. Did I capture that correctly? Again, there's just a yes or no, but it's also my way of using a reflective to let them know I've heard them and we have everything.
Yeah, you can use that in a couple of different ways. During the process, if there's a lull in the conversation and a question hasn't popped into your mind, again, I think in that middle phase of mastery, many people spend so much time, I got to think of a new question. What's my next question going to be? Now, to let everybody know, on the third page of our document, we have a bunch of list of questions, and Philip actually has a bunch more that he's going to be sharing with me to add to this document, though. So before we get to you, we'll have even more. So having a list of questions is a great tool, but still, even then, the tendency is to, what am I gonna ask next? And you get to a lull, literally looking down at your notes and just repeating back what the person just said, even without the I'm paraphrasing here, or if I understand you correctly, or what you're telling me is, even if you don't do that, the person understands what you're doing by repeating that information back to them. And many times, this is one of the super interesting things that I find fascinating about communication, is so many people assume that what the person is telling you, A, is the truth, right? And B, that they're actually communicating it the right way. And oftentimes that's just not the case. I'll give you a live example from my own experience. I was refinancing my house back in 2007, and I was talking to the mortgage guy, and I obviously know quite a bit about finance, and I kept saying to him, I'm really concerned about liquidity. And when he came back to me with a solution, the solution that he came back to me with was a mortgage product that allowed me to keep all of my equity outside of my house, so essentially in cash. And I looked at it and I was like, no, that's not what I want. And the problem was that I was using the wrong word. I didn't mean liquidity. What I meant was cash flow, but I kept using the word incorrectly, and he didn't confirm back to me what I thought that meant. And so because of that, he presented an entirely incorrect product. What I really actually wanted was an interest-only option on my mortgage, so that if I had a month where my cash flow was low, I had just transitioned into full-time commission, and so I was concerned about variable income. And he didn't ask me any questions about that. He didn't repeat it back to me. I just said, I'm worried about liquidity, and he took it and ran.
Well, there you
right?
go. The reflective question would have helped out. The other thing
Right.
that you bring up, Dan, I'm going to digress. I'm going to tell a little story. You've been building on it, and it's the difference between training and education. And
Have I heard
right,
this
you're
one?
talking about mastery and becoming conscious competent and conscious competent, and you become conscious competent when you the mother of all learning is repetition, and you kicked it off here today. We're going to do I call them real plays, and if you in the initial interview that I teach, it lasts, like I said, about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's 4 conversations. And if you time it, the advisor is only speaking 7 minutes during that hour time frame. The rest he's asking questions, or she's asking questions. Now, the difference between education and training, if any of you have children out there and your children come home, and let's say they're the junior high children said, at dinner table, they say, hey, Pop, we really had a great sex education class today. Okay, probably not too alarming. What'd you learn? Oh, that's good. Now, a month later, they come back and they say, Pop, we really had a great sex training class today. Now I suspect you're going to have a little different conversation. The difference between education and training, one is just
Application.
knowledge, imparting knowledge. Training is doing. So,
Right.
and if you become, like you were saying, if you become conscious competent and you learn what your profession very, very well, and the questions very, very well, in this initial interview, then you don't have to worry about the next thing you're going to say. You can start picking up, like that person who missed the cues with you, Dan, the nonverbals, because that's when your words and your verbal language, both your words, which of course are the verbal, and then the nonverbal, your body language, should be matching. If not, someone who's mastered the questions and know what they're doing and feels comfortable will be able to have that social awareness and pick up on that. One, how they're coming across to the other person, and then more importantly, how their message is being encoded by the other person across from them, and if it's registering. So going back to these questions, and questions are the answers. And you can tell the quality of the person by the questions they ask. So when I'm in my initial interview, my setting the stage, that's maybe 90 seconds. Second conversation I have is around emotionally compelling goals, developing emotionally compelling goals. So, I'm starting off with an open-ended question right away. You've said retirement. Paint a picture for me. What are you doing in retirement? Broad stroke picture, brush. Paint a picture. What are you doing? Tell me more is a great question to keep it going on. That's interesting. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Can you expound on that? So start hot, start like a funnel. Start really open, then bring it down. And okay, so tell me, very good. Use your reflective. Here's what, let me see if I captured that correctly. Here's what you said you want to be doing in retirement. Okay, yep, very good. Then go, specifically, when do you want to retire? And this is a key question. Specifically, studies show that people who get more specific, the time, date, and year, and actual dollar amount in today's dollars as their goals, they have a higher propensity of achieving them than those who stay just vague. Because now they're owning it. So, and then okay, the next question: what are you presently doing towards achieving these goals? And if they look at you dumbfounded, then are you doing an example? EG or IE. That is, are you do you have 401k? Do you have an IRA? Tell me more. Where a salesperson will come in, they'll immediately start honing in on how much money do you have in that? Where's it invested? No, you're maybe again 2-3 minutes into this conversation right now. You just high level. That's okay. Just take notes. Got a 401k. You'll get, like you said, when you get to the fact find, you'll get real specific if you need to at that time, or you'll have them just send in all the data to you. Bring in your brokerage statements, your 401k statements, whatever. That's at the end of the meeting if you decide to work with them. But what are you presently doing towards achieving this goal? Then the question you ask, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with what you're currently doing? Then what would after you hear that, what would you like to see changed? They'll tell you what needs to happen here. then you're right. And is there anything else I need to know about this goal? Then I'll say, all right, here's what I'll do. I'll take all that information, I'll plug it into these planning tools I have, and and I can take the amount of money you've got set up, your 401, your 401ks, what you're contributing, your IRAs. You want to retire at age 62 on June 1st, 2032. I'll put all this in. I'll incorporate inflation. Then in Social Security, if you want me to, we'll take a look at that as well. And by the way, would you like me to incorporate that in or not incorporate that in? Then I'm going to, okay, and I'll just take my note. Now, what I'll do is when I get that information back, there's going to be, it's going to tell us this information, and it's going to give us these options. How much extra you have to put away if you fall short right now of achieving the goal. How much you got to start putting away right now today on a monthly or lump sum basis. Or you're going to, if you don't have those resources, reduce the goal. Or you're going to extend the goal instead of 2032, maybe it's 33, 34, or you got to take more risk with your money in order to achieve this goal, or any of those options. And then ask them, does that sound like the sort of information you could benefit from and would like to receive? They say yes, relax. This is how you're building that perceived value, because the consumer, when they come in, they automatically have a cost box in their head. That cost box is greater than the values box. So it's your role to help, demonstrate your value proposition, how you're going to help them out by building the values box or benefit box so it equals or exceeds the cost box. Then the next thing, well, it could, this also plan could tell us you're putting too much away. If that's the case, we turn off the spigot, put some of this money towards the other goal, and make sure you are able to fulfill and achieve that goal, or retire with more money. Or you retire earlier, or do you don't have to take as much risk? Does that sound like information you'd like to benefit and receive? Now, here's the key question, and I'll turn it back to you, Dan. The last question I ask emotionally compelling goal: close your eyes. And let me paint a picture for you. It's June 1st, 2032. You're retiring. We've determined you're not going to run out of money. You're going to be able to do your golfing. You're going to be able to, every 3 to 5 years, take that trip worth $5,000 to $7,000. And you're going to be able to spend as much time as you want with your grandchildren. 1 or 2 words, how will that make you feel? Now they own it. You get them to emotionally own it. So those are just some of the things, if people out there don't have a very good initial interview and they want to get mastery of how to ask the right questions and develop emotionally compelling goals, because the next conversation you have is just, it's very easy. Like you said, Dan, it's a fact finder. Well, I'm going to use more closed-end questions, particularly if I got an expressive or amiable. I don't want to be there more than an hour. So I'm going to keep short-ended questions. Tell me exactly, ballpark, what do you have in checking? What do you have here? Boom, boom, boom.
Well, and that you can do you could literally do that with a fact-finding sheet they can take home and fill out.
Yep.
If you're interested in our initial interview process, reach out to us, info@value-ability.com. We have all of the scripting, all of the questions, all of the documents to go along with that.
Tools that they can use in front of a client, right? And the client-facing
Absolutely.
tools. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So that's
Yep.
Like we call it charting your course.
Absolutely. And they can be all designed and customized for your business and practice. And so if that's of interest to you, reach out to us. But the bottom line is, even if you're using your own initial interview or data gathering process, one of the trainer that really got me to open my mind to this consultative approach was used a phrase that I just love, which was super simple, was his motto: be curious.
Yes.
Be curious, be interested. And as you mentioned, that connects the nonverbals to the verbals, right? Because even if you have a great even if you come and buy our stuff, and our stuff's good. And you just sit there and you read it like a robot and you don't master these, that's not going to work. You really need to be curious, and you're trying to essentially figure out what is making this person tick and trying to help them understand that. And some people, to be fair, there are people out there that don't spend a ton of time thinking about this stuff. I actually think back to it was the first time you ever demoed this for me, and I won't use the person's name because it was a super emotional interaction, but it was somebody who had come into money through life insurance, through the death of a loved one, right. And we were going to help this person with investing that money, and I had already prepared the client by saying, hey, he's going to ask you some questions that are emotionally based, and so just be prepared for it. And I'm sure you remember the person just started crying as soon as you asked the very first question because this money had such an emotional tie, and there wasn't really a good answer. Like, they didn't have that answer because of the situation that they had been placed in because of the death of the parents had died. So, and sometimes it's not something like that where they're not thinking about it because they don't want to think about it. Sometimes it's just they haven't thought about it. Like, there are people out there that are just trying to get through the everyday, and they get into their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they're always thinking, yeah, I'm going to take care of that financial planning one day. And they've just never sat down and thought about what is retirement really going to look like. So you may get some people that don't respond yet. Again, just because you ask a open-ended question doesn't mean you won't get a closed-ended response. That was always one of my favorite.
Particularly, again, if they're more of a driver or they're analytic, and from our social styles episode.
Right. Yeah, just not super emotional. Mm-hmm. They're not super touchy-feely and not connective. Now, that may also tread on your ideal client, right? If you want to like your clients, right, and you're a open and emotive person, maybe then that's not a great fit for you. But the key is it can't just be all analytics and numbers. You have to get down into, and this of course ties back to our entire process, which is if you're not connecting the goals to the values, then
right,
the possibility that they're going to achieve them is relatively low.
That's a great point. And we didn't build on the, how do you determine the values, and that's a whole exercise, to have them figure out how to, your top 15 values do not change over your lifetime, but the priority of them will. So having your clients figure out what their top 5 values are, and then linking those values to the goals, and then using that information to help them make decisions, particular decisions during times of highly competing emotions, like you kicked off our session here today when you have the high stress. All right, there's questions that, and you need, this is when we've said before, as in our industry, you're a glorified social worker by heart, but you're a capitalist by brain. And you need, investments work, investors don't. You need to make sure you, as the advisor, this is when you're call it a life coach or you're a coach, you're helping them make better informed decisions during the times of highly competing positive or negative emotions. And that's what I learned from my mentor, Doug Lennox, the 4 R's. You help them, and that's recognize, reflect, reframe, and respond. Whole different session that we could teach, but not for today. The questions to walk the client off the ledge.
Just to wrap up the main section, the last bit that I want to touch on is twofold. We kind of talked a little bit about active listening, but I just want to officially walk through that. So
yeah, good.
The active listening portion is literally going through your notes, and it's not an extension. It's not, oh, you mentioned you enjoy water skiing, tell me more about that. Or, oh, you mentioned the cabin, tell me more about that. Those are question extensions where you're just digging a little deeper into a certain topic. The active listening is, and you demoed it at the end of a section or at some point where you are going to literally repeat back to them what you have heard. And as I mentioned in that story, sometimes they hear that and they'll do one of two things. They'll either say, oh, wait, no, yeah, that's not exactly what I meant. And they will clarify something if they used the wrong word or something like that. Or if you misheard it, it's totally possible that ran into it this morning. It's 9 o'clock this morning. My furnace guy shows up because I misheard the scheduler when I called a couple days ago. She said 8 to 4, and I thought she said 4 to 8. And so here's my furnace guy banging on my door at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't expect him to be there. We mishear things. People missay things. People say things in ways that they don't exactly intend, especially if that was my point of mentioning that people haven't thought about these things as they're kind of digging into their own psyche and starting to think about, wow, gee, you know what? I haven't thought about what is 2032 going to look like? What is it going to look like that day? They may just be kind of coming up with words, and those words may not exactly be what they're trying to communicate. So active listening helps with that. So some phrases that you can use, if I understand you correctly, what you're telling me is, in other words, what you're saying is, let me see if I have this correct.
Right.
So just some phrases to introduce the fact that, hey, I'm going to be playing back to you this information. And then lastly, this isn't really question asking or active listening per se, but it's super important to this section of any process of getting to know a client, and it's the language of need. The language of need, when people are using these words, these are keys. And when I was training folks, I would say, if you hear one of these words, circle it 3 times and put 10 stars around it, because you have to come back to it, whether it's a question extender or you're gonna, active listening, repeat that back to them. This is super important. And those phrases are, I want, I need, I'd like, I hope, I'm looking for, it's important, it would be helpful, it would be nice. Those phrases are always right before something that someone has made a discovery. And you know what? You know what would be nice? You know what I'd like? Whatever is after that, they have discovered something. Now, they may have already known it, or they may have come across it in your discussion, but having those words, I used to make up a little laminated sheet and print it out and give it to each one of the people that I was training. And I would say, stick this up. Most of the training during my career was people that were doing phone call approaches. And so I would say, stick this right over the top of your phone. And while you're on every conversation, I want you to be staring right at it. And once you get comfortable and understand or have those words really built into your mind, those are the keys. Not everybody's going to use them, but they're the moments where people are either making discoveries or they're really getting to something that is important to them. So any last thoughts before we wrap up the main section?
Yeah, I'd like to, one of my top values, the fourth one, is create meaningful relationships and meaningful work. So I'd like to, Dan, just give we have other people listening who just aren't in sales. They might own a business. They, or they're, managers, and they're running teams. So for those people, and also for those advisors who are looking to hire a PA, a personal assistant, we have we have past behavior is a good indicator of future behavior. So this is more geared towards, I'm going to give you some tips here for recruiting questions. We have behavioral questions. Give us a call, but if again, another shameless plug, if you want our template and get some coaching on interviewing, past behavior is a good indicator of future behavior. So I asked the what questions here, and the one I'm going to share with you is right at the end to demonstrate active listening, and I would say it would be this question. And I put my pen down. I put my portfolio. I'll close it. I'll put that down, and I'll say, look, I've been doing a lot of the talking here with the questions, and this has been very good. But to help me now make a final decision here between other candidates and yourself, one I know you very well. Two, I don't. One, I don't know you very well. 10, I know you extremely well. How well would you rate how well I know you at this present time? And now if someone gives me a 9 or 10, that's Pollyanna, and I've got to be careful. But if it's a 7 or 8, etc., I say okay. To move it to an 8, if they said 7, move it to an 8 or move it to a 9. Or if they gave me a 9, to move it to a 10. What other information would you like to share about yourself that I haven't picked up on here yet today? And boy, you're going to get a lot of great information here, and stay within compliance of HR issues.
Has anybody ever said that you know them at 10?
I think I had, in all these interviews, maybe 1 or 2 of those, Dan. And then if I get that, I just say, that is great. But you know what? There must be something that, to help distinguish you between the other candidates that I don't know about you that you might want to share to help differentiate yourself. What one or 2 things are those? And then I let them go. That's how you got to pick it on. But I'm going to be careful the someone who says 10 in 45 minutes.
Say, yeah, I'm guessing that's not the truth. You want to revise your answer?
But I like that, and then the last question I would share with them, questions are the answers. So this one, again, in managing relationships, you've heard us say this one before, but look, if we're sitting down, this is one to manage expectations. If we're sitting down and you say 3 years from today, you've said we've had a successful relationship, what must happen in order for that to occur? I used to tell my boys, you ask when you're being interviewed right out of college or university that they attended, and you're starting to take these jobs, ask them that question. And if they can't tell you, well, and that's going to help you determine whether or not this is the right position for you, and you have the talent and the skills to do well in it. That's that you need to know, so you can say no. Then the next question asks, people in your organization, or the position maybe I'm filling here. What people that have worked for you, where are they now within the organization? And if that person can't demonstrate to you they've developed and trained someone and moved them up in the organization, if they can't list out anyone, you get your training shoes on and you run out that door as fast as you can. Because this whole thing, your career-wise, it's going to be around grabbing good mentors, unless you're extremely brilliant. And that leads us into our article.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great point that question asking is everywhere, and it's not just in the sales process. So as you mentioned in the interviewing process, I use a version of that question when I'm in interviews, which is, 2 years from now, I've gotten this job and I've been super successful and you're about to promote me. What are the 1 or 2 things that I've really done well in that time frame? So I have used a version of that question. But great point that questions are everywhere. Whether you're the interviewer, the interviewee, whether you're the salesperson, or even in a client situation, asking, we've talked about this in some of our previous episodes, asking good questions of your prospective valued advisor. Go back and listen to our valued advisor episode. Is a huge thing. So that rounds out our main section for this week. And as Philip mentioned, we are going into our article review for the week. Again, check out value-ability.com. Click on the content tab for our asking questions and active listening document. We will post that out there for you. Our article for this week, Why You're Not One of the World's Great Investors. I loved that headline. Philip, why don't you start out?
I'm going to build on a phrase I used earlier. Investments work, investors don't. And the reason why investments work, investors don't, and most of us know it, comes down to our emotions and primary emotion, which is fear. So what I took from this article is if you do not have I call the 3 T's, if you don't have the time to study the market, you probably shouldn't be in it. The next T, if you do not have the temperament, because during times of crisis, you've heard, there's an example in here with this last COVID, this guy, he bet the farm on it and it worked, where he did, some excellent decision making but if you don't have that temperament to, particularly in a down market, to buy or know what, hey, this is also a good time to hold. I think there's a classic line of Warren Buffett's, look, in times like these, shares revert back to their rightful owners. And that because they have the temperament. And then the last, because the fundamentals are still there. And the last one is if you don't have the training on this, so it's time, temperament, training, you probably, don't, stay out of the game here. Hire out other professionals who have these 3 T's and let them invest your money. And stay focused on your goals. And it doesn't matter what I've found from the financial planning process and working in it all these years. It doesn't matter whether or not you come in first, second, and third every year. The objective here is actually achieving the goal that you've set out for yourself. Because that way you're only competing against yourself and you're not always measuring yourself up against others. That's a sure sign of failure. Because you just never be done. There's always going to be some people who are better, have the natural talent and the skills here. So that's what I took away from it, Dan. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I agree. First of all, I didn't really intend it to be a fit with our topic today, but really most of our topics kind of blend into one another because it's the same themes, but it's focused around what is your goal, right?
Right.
Whether the market is up, 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, it's getting that client to understand that isn't the goal. Like beating the benchmark isn't the goal. Beating the top investor for the year isn't the goal. And it also focuses, this article also focuses in on the fact that all of these lists that show top performing funds, top performing investors, exhibit survivorship bias, which actually we'll talk about more next week with our investment research authors. I'll mention that in a second. Only the survivors win and continue. So the people that made big black swan bets and it didn't pay off, they're not there anymore.
They don't get to write the history, do they, Dan? The winners
right.
get to write the history.
Exactly. Well, and it's the thing that I always say, everybody sees these, right? It's the ad, I predicted the 2008 financial crisis. Right. I predicted the .com bust. I predicted blah. My first question to that is, how many other predictions did you make that didn't come true? Because I can sit and say something bad's going to happen this year, and as long as I say it every year, eventually I'm going to be right. And then I get to say, I predicted... It's one of those things, again, that also is a form of survivorship bias, right? Because the picks that didn't come true just fade away, and they only promote the ones that they got right. So that's so excited that you tell me you got it right. If you're Chicken Little was right once, right?
Right.
The sky was falling at one point. So, but it does go back to that fact of so much information out there. You're getting bombarded with it. It's traditionally fear-based because, as I always say, look, if you turn on the local news and the first thing is, everything in the world is great, we cured cancer, no one's living in poverty any longer, the person watching TV says, oh, great, and pops a beer and walks out onto their back patio. Whereas if it's, the world is going to end and everything's terrible, oh no, I got to stay and watch. Yeah. So they're overwhelmed with negativity and that need to try and reach out there and achieve what they think is, something that is to be admired, the 40-50% gains. Yeah. It's just a false, it's a false idol, and you really need to be getting back to, as we talk about, what are the things that you're focused on, what are your goals, and what are your values,
and what rate of return do you need to be able to achieve those goals, and what's your risk tolerance, and how much risk, how much are you willing to lose, actual dollar amount. That's the key.
Yep.
Know yourself. I think that ultimately this article, know yourself before you start playing this game. And
right.
And the advisors are out there listening. If you're focusing in just on returns, your clients, as soon as they figure out that you can't beat the market consistently, all you're doing is renting their money.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about this actually next week. Next week, we have episode 24, Investment Research Made Easy. We're going to be joined by two authors, Elisabetta Basilico and Tommy Johnson. They're both academic investment research CFAs who have written a book demystifying investment research and giving examples of good investment research for the everyday investor, be it financial advisors or savvy individual investors. And they took quite a bit in the book about this, and we will discuss it more, of the crossover between investment advice and financial advice, and the fact that those two aren't always linked. So that was one of the big, really interesting takeaways I took from our discussion. So tune in next week for that. It's actually going to be a two-part series, episode 24 and 25. So check back next week for the first part of that in episode 24. If you have topics that you would like us to cover or questions for us, reach out to us on our email, info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. If you want to follow us on social media, we are active there. Check out our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at value-ability.com. Click on the Contact Us tab, and all of our links are there for our social media links. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. Typically, I have a request at this point focused on the topic that we had, but today I just want it to be a more general request. We know that we have consistent listeners. Send us questions. Come on. We do article reviews each week. We want listener questions, so we are going to stomp our foot a little bit here, pound on the table a little bit. We know you're out there, consistent listeners, so please just info@value-ability.com. Shoot us a question that's on your mind about finance, business. We would like to have some listener-submitted questions, and so I'm going to take a minute here to get on my soapbox and pound the table and ask you for that. So by next week, we want to hear those. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week. And remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.